are you?
You have an agenda?
Here it is.
Yeah.
Need this?
Yeah, just borrow.
Can I give you this part? Because I don't have this part. I'll just give you the agenda part. Because I need this. I don't have this one. Okay.
Throw it in the bag.
I don't need it. I don't need it. All I want
He
is.
turned his in and he said, I can't. And he went to the baseball field for practice and they said,
Hi, Fernando.
Call meeting to order. Shelley, can you do roll call, please?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. District 1, Councilman Rios.
Here.
District 2, Councilman Pastor. District 3, Councilman Leatham. District 4, Vice Mayor Stapleton.
here.
District 5, Councilwoman Giles. Here. District 6, Councilman Shipley.
Here.
Mayor Gameros.
Here.
We have a quorum, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Shelley. Please join me in prayer. Lord Jesus, we ask for a special blessing and your guidance over our meeting tonight as we enter in discussion. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Jesse, can you lead us in the pledge?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have new business. Item A, council will review and discuss proposed changes to the current code of ethics for public officials with possible direction to prepare a final draft. And we have Paul and Tina.
And Mr. Mayor, Tina Vanucci is going to go ahead and lead the discussion.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of council, it's good to see you all again. At one of your last meetings, you expressed a desire to look at the code of ethics and see if there were any changes that should be made. What you have before you is staff's recommendations on what the changes are. You'll see some of the changes are on actually what is a violation. I think we strengthen the city manager or just specify the city manager form of government, and then remove some things that were duplicative of your HR roles. The majority of the changes, I would say, are in the enforcement provisions. And really what we were trying to do there is make sure there's some checks and balances. So now only council, this is a council code, so one of you would have to bring the complaint. That doesn't mean that, if you get a report from a citizen that you can't bring it on their behalf, but it would have to come from one of you instead of from a third party. So that would be the first check. There's also a requirement that you meet and somewhat confer with the person you're filing against to see if a resolution can be worked out at the lowest level possible. So hopefully there would be some situations that may not even result in a complaint after you do that. And lastly, then it would go to your city manager and city attorney to look at and determine that everything that is required to be in a complaint is there, and that if everything submitted is true, that would actually be a violation of the code. If they find it is missing some of the data, that doesn't mean you can amend the complaint and refile it, but it would just be one more check and balance. If they find that it is a violation, then it may get to an independent ethics officer who would do a complaint and submit a report, but the final say is still with council on any sanctions or other reprimands. So those are the major changes, I would say. But if you guys have questions, or Paul, if you have anything you want to add, that's what we're here to discuss tonight.
Well, and Mr. Mayor, members of council, Tina, thank you. We had, like I say, you had the major violation, the minor violation, and then it has to meet the threshold of the violation. So, is it sufficient? And then a minor means it doesn't rise to the bigger things and can work it out. So I think that you stair step, and the only thing that reaches the major violation are those things that deserve to reach the major violation. Mr. Mayor, I send it back to you for a conversation.
If anybody has any questions or comment right now, looking through the document.
Are we going through the policy, or are you asking if we have any concerns about the policy?
I think Eleanor.
I was just going to leave it up to you guys for discussion. I believe it was included in your packet, but if you want to walk through each change, we can, or if you guys just have questions on specific changes, then we can address those as well.
Okay, then I have a question. On page 3, council members and public officials, under item J, it says, shall not disclose or furnish to anyone any information concerning city property, personnel, litigation, or proceedings of the city. Now, what I think you mean is that we shouldn't be disclosing secrets or things that shouldn't be made to the public, but I'm sorry, we're here to represent the city. So when somebody wants to know something about the city, guess who they call first? So to say any doesn't seem like the appropriate word there.
So council member, I think there's a clause you're missing and that ends in other than public information or with legal authorization.
Right, but what does that mean? Does that mean I have to find it on a web page somewhere for it to be public information, or what is public?
So most of your records would be public information unless it's about, if it contains somebody's personal information or if it was discussed with your attorney. So there's an attorney-client privilege. So there are certain instances where there is confidentiality because it's personal in nature, or because there's confidential. So no, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to find it on the website, but it would be, anything obviously that's coming to you before council that's in a packet. But I think if you had questions, you would ask Paul or Shelley if there was a situation where you weren't sure.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Tina, can I take a stab at this?
Absolutely.
So I think what they're looking at, property, if we're trying to sell or buy something, I think you don't want to disclose information about that's involved in a sale. I think personal.
Well, okay, but I should say of a confidential nature, not any information, because it says any
It
information.
does. It also says proceedings of the city. That's open to interpretation, which could be extremely broad.
We're here to represent the public.
But
If it stated something such as e-session materials or otherwise, then that would be understood. But this is, like, to both council members' points, this is very broad in saying any.
so litigation. If we're
All of that is subject to e-session.
no, but if you hear it outside of litigation, we would ask you to keep that confidential also.
Right, but if we're negotiating for a property,
Right.
then we don't go around talking about it.
No, but I think this covers. I think this covers that stuff that may take place outside of e-session, but still is not is proprietary, not public.
If I,
Based
It
on,
doesn't say that.
I beg to differ because at one point in time, city manager, I asked you if something was confidential and you agreed it was. And after further discussion between myself and the city attorney and yourself, we then understood it was not confidential. So I'm afraid that if this is this vague, we get into one of those situations again.
And I think in that the information was not confidential, but it was not made public yet. I would think that, and this is original language that's been in here. This is not new language we've added. But I think there's, if you hear outside of e-session, if there are casual conversations that, just like I had with you here today about some stuff going on, it would behoove you. I expect that that it's not going to be shared, but I guess it's your code of ethics, and so however you want to interpret that.
That was in our old one.
Yeah.
I have the old one here, yeah. I can understand property, personnel, litigation. Can you give me an example of proceedings of the city? What would that be?
If we have a strategy of how we're going to approach something, when we're going to put something on the agenda, what order we're bringing things together, who we're going to contact first, things like that, that would be something that we may not want to share with whatever the process is.
But that could mean a lot of other things as well.
Well, yeah.
If it's on, if
open to
it's on the,
interpretation.
Mr. Mayor, if it's on the agenda, listed on the agenda, it becomes public information right away.
No, and Mr. Mayor, members of council, I don't think it's meant for e-session. I don't think it's meant for things in a council meeting. I think it's meant for just day-to-day communication with the city manager and with each other.
Mr. Mayor. So Paul, you sent out an email this week saying something about rumors about
Mhm.
the sidewalk stuff.
Yeah.
Now, that was all discussed in public
And
session.
all my emails are public too.
Yeah, and obviously, people have been asking about it because you said there's rumors out there that people are encouraged about. So is that information we need to share, or is that information we need not to share? In my interpretation, I would say it's, if we had discussed this whole process, somebody comes up and says, hey, what the hell's going on? I don't see any problem with saying, well, this is what was done in the city council, yeah. And if they're asking you questions about that,
And Mr. Mayor, members of council, Councilman Pastor, I mean, my emails are there to give you a heads up so that you can answer those questions and you do know what's going on.
okay.
And usually the only time if I put confidential on there, and that doesn't mean it's not, and so I'm not sure exactly what the, what they're looking at here, but it would have to be something where the information, I would imagine should have been obvious that it shouldn't have been shared and cause damage of some sort. I think it would be tied into some other type of behavior.
And Mr. Mayor, if I could, the wording with concerning city property. So anything that falls under city property, to my understanding, we're not to furnish anybody that the city owns it or that the city has any ties in it. I mean, that's very vague. Now, if you put in there the city buying property, or if you're in discussions of property, then that, that's e-session material. But if the way this is read, somebody was to come up and ask me what that building is that is sitting on the side, and I was to say that it's the evidence building, am I in violation of this?
No, I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, no, I don't think so. I think that let's see, I'm reading again.
Yeah, council member, I think that would be public information. So there is an exception for any public information or with legal authorization. So, any public information, you're the owner of property, what's that property used for, would be public information. So that would be part of that exception.
And so I believe that the only way, I think you'd have to, if someone's going to file a complaint against that, I think it would be absolutely important that that you would have somehow known that it wasn't. I think it would be on whoever to determine that, how did you know that it wasn't public information? Because I think it's safe to assume that everything's public information except for that is an e-session. And so I think if if someone were to talk about, well, you shared that information, it's like, well, and no one told me it wasn't public information, and I think that's a fair defense and something that staff or whoever needs to be careful to identify information that is not, either it's confidential or not confidential, but not made public. And so I think there's a narrow band there. And I
Well, I think my point is that the language is not distinguish the difference between the language. And that's my issue. My issue isn't that, all these things are common sense. You don't jeopardize our position. We don't, and the public's business needs to be done in public, but that's not what this says. It says any, and then it goes on to personnel, property. And we don't discuss litigation, but you know what? If we're getting sued, you don't think that somebody's going to ask me, hey, so what's going on with that property over there with the zoning issue? I said, well, it'll probably be in litigation eventually. So come on.
no, but
Right?
I mean,
That's not a violation. It's not a secret. People
No, a
know
lot of that's
something
been
happened.
Public information anyway.
Right. And so if I'm supposed to just say, oh, well, gee, I'm a councilman, I'm not supposed to say anything to anybody about anything, then I might as well not be elected.
Mr. Mayor, members of council,
So-
I think that if you were engaged in unethical behavior, this would become crystal clear. I think if you're not engaged in
But I do contracts for a living. What I'm trying to tell you is this doesn't distinguish the difference between that which is appropriate or inappropriate. It says any. And that's my...
Mayor? Mr. Mayor, could I take a stab? This is Bill Sims. Tina only changed one word in that sentence. That was to take out the reference to all the third parties. As you can see, the word council members is what was added. The rest of that language is, as the mayor pointed out, already in your current code. But I understand the concern that's being raised, I'm hearing by a number of counselors. What Tina said was correct. It's the last 7 words of that sentence that does all the work. That's what says everything's confidential. But it's the first 2/3, the line and a half, it looks like it says you can't talk to anybody about anything. She didn't write that. One way to say it differently that would put a different emphasis would say, council members may disclose information to the public regarding blank, 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 except if such information is required to be confidential due to the attorney-client privilege, the executive session privilege, or any other confidentiality requirement. For example, if you learned about the secret formula for Coca-Cola, that would be proprietary and you couldn't release it. And so it would be captured by the last 7 words, but you're all concerned that the first 15 words put a muzzle on you. I mean, what if you just put the converse? Council members may disclose information to the public regarding, provided they may not disclose any confidential or other non-public information due to the attorney-client, executive session, or other confidentiality requirements.
I like that.
I think there's even language like that.
But Tina didn't write that. Somebody well before all of us wrote it.
The second part of this whole sentence explains the whole thing, other than public information. Explains the whole thing right there. I mean, it is strict on the first part of it, but it explains on the second part what you can disclose. You gotta read.
All I'm saying is move the 7 words up front, and that addresses, I think, some of your colleagues' concerns. That's all I'm saying. But you don't have to. It's as Tina says, it's yours.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a valid point. I'm not an English teacher, but the period ends the sentence, and what we're seeing here is commas and commas and commas until you get to the period. But the period ends the sentence, and at the end of the period is the explanation of, with the authorization or like that. So, but I still like the language that Bill presented. Where members may.
Members may and be specific with.
Right. And I think it really gives it a softer tone. Instead of you shall not, it's a you may do this. However, based on these set of rules.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Bill, did you capture that? I have may discuss as long as it does not.
Council members may disclose to the public information concerning, because I don't want to be concerning all that stuff.
Yeah.
Except council members may not disclose any information that is not available to the public due to executive session laws, attorney-client privilege, or other confidentiality requirements.
And
you just start by saying you may, and you finish by saying you won't.
Right. Right.
I still like that better. I think that's good.
And the fact that just because it was in the last code doesn't mean it shouldn't be changed. And that's why we're going through the code, because there are areas we need to be changing. And obviously we found one right off the bat.
And I don't remember the last time somebody showed me this code, so.
Well, that's true. That's one of the reasons it was brought up. But yeah, that's a good. So, can I ask a question, Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead.
In the paragraph right above, gifts, gratuities, and favors, council members shall comply with requirements of Title 38, 41, yada, yada, yada. So this week we got an email from staff asking what our t-shirt sizes are for the upcoming Poppy Festival. Now, is that a gift, a gratuity, or a favor?
That would be marketing. But I think there's a Bill. There's a threshold of what is nominal, and
it depends. It's different in every code. When I was a deputy county attorney in Maricopa, we couldn't do anything at all, and most governments have a $25 filter. And I got to tell you, I'm so impressed. I'm going to ask Shelley a question. She knows everything. I don't know if she knows off the top of her head if it's in your code. I don't think there is, to be honest. I don't think you have a threshold in your code, to be honest.
But we could add a,
But the state legislature sets one for us. I thought it was like 25 or something like
25,
that.
yeah.
No, in fact, you're right. Who was that? Was that Councilmember?
Shipley.
yeah.
Yes, sir. You're right. Back in ASCAM, you're probably too young to remember the legislators putting money in their briefcases on CBS television TV. Those were all legislators. And immediately after that, in Title 41, the legislature adopted rules that imposed restrictions on them. The only restriction they impose on you is if you have are meeting with a paid lobbyist, and then that has to be disclosed. So the state legislature did not draft rules for you, but that's where you're right. They talk about $25, but in typical fashion, they exempted ASU. They exempted, you can go to any sports game. So I mean, they didn't do much. But there's that statute in Title 41 doesn't apply to you. What applies to you is the conflict of interest statutes that you can't, and the bribery statutes that you can't get a bribe, you can't be extorted, you can't force persons to do things, and there's no minimal value on that. 1 cent is enough. But let me ask, what brought this up? What section of the code brought this up?
Section I.
I.
Can I ask, is that, you said a staff member, is that the city is providing the t-shirts, or who's providing the t-shirts?
Well, the chamber.
The
Oh,
Chamber
then,
of Commerce.
Oh,
I was wondering why I didn't get the.
So this would capture just what I said. Title 41 has one element that has to do with meeting with a paid lobbyist. Title 38 is the big one, and you have to disclose. You can't use anything. You use your office to derive benefit, and there is no nominal value there. It is once you cross the threshold, you've created a violation. So I like this better because Title 48 and Title 38 and Title 41 change, and so if you copied them in religiously here, you'd be stuck. And if they change, then you have to go back and amend your code. So I think this works, but to be honest, you should have. Well, you may want to think about a gift policy. I mean, you don't. We could again. Tina could help you with that too.
Would
But this is enough. This is enough. This satisfies the requirements of the law. Paragraph I, and that's in your old one, right? That's the old one. There's no changes.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, would you like to have more detail about whether $25 or so that everybody can just look at this and instead of having to reference that, kind of see current a note, current gratuities of under 25 are allowed or something like that? Or would you like to see it referenced? It may be by a.
Kelly, was that passed as far as in the past with the city? I was the impression that you could accept up to 25.
And that usually like a lunch, or and the thing is it's not like a T-shirt you're gonna wear out to dinner. It's something for a promotional material to support marketing. But we can find a way so it's not locked in stone. But current statute limits 25 or something like that. Just so it'd be more helpful.
I don't have a problem with that.
It would take out the guesswork.
Yeah. Because that way, if somebody just gives you, like, I was going to give you guys a little, what do they call these things? Croquis or whatever. And don't worry, they don't cost that much.
So if somebody takes you out to lunch, dinner, or business, we can't accept them paying for our lunch.
No, I think that falls under the a meal. Tina, what have you been told about meals? I think they have
some of it, yeah. I mean, if it's nominal, but it's still not. If it's in exchange for a vote, or it could be perceived to be in exchange for a vote, if it's somebody that's coming before council on a big contract, it's probably not a good idea to accept any money.
I can tell you in my business, anytime I have a face-to-face meet or an inspection with a government or state agency, that's not allowed. We do not purchase meals for them. We can sit down and have lunch with them, but we will not purchase their meal.
But No, I also know, Mr. Mayor, members of council, I also know that many times to facilitate meetings and attract elected officials, it's just food is bait. Food is a way of getting your time. Hey, I got to eat lunch anyway, and I can get there. And so I think it's up to every member to say, the headline test. What would it look like if it turned out that I had lunch with so and so, and then 2 weeks later I voted on so and so. And I think it gives you some freedom there.
We leaving that one as is?
I think we'll reference meals, and maybe we can find a meal reference that's easy to follow.
Well, most meals, well, you have a restaurant, $25 buy a meal for somebody? Yeah, so I think 25, just saying 25 is fine.
Have a dollar amount in there, I
Yeah.
think.
Okay. All right, we'll leave out meals.
I did have one other question. It's Fernando again. There was one part where we were talking about kind of like a conflict of interest. And then it didn't say, I just feel like what I've learned about conflict of interest is if you have a conflict of interest, you state your conflict and then you excuse yourself from all discussion. You're not to participate in discussion, you're not to present, you just get out of the room and then come back when it's over. And the part that I had in question kind of didn't say that. And then it went into the very next paragraph and talked about it. Where is it?
H1 on page 2, conflict of interest, the very bottom line says, and shall abstain from participating in deliberations and decision-making when conflicts may exist. And that's based on 38-501, which I know, Bill, that's part of open meeting law training.
Oh, yeah. And I had it under G. I put except when conflict of interest. And then you get into conflict of interest at the very next one. So, because you put under communication. And I was thinking under communication, it should say except for conflict of interest, but it's covered in the next one. So is that adequate?
The way I read that, council member, is G is really saying that you need to share information you receive from other sources about city business. So that's not necessarily a conflict of interest. So H is more specific. You may receive information that's relevant to a matter from somebody that doesn't create a conflict of interest, but it's still saying you should share that information if it affects your decision-making process.
Okay. I didn't really focus on the word received. So if it's your own input, but then your input is a conflict of interest, then that's not received. That's generated, right?
Right. So I think G is more dealing with information you receive, and H is if you have a pecuniary or proprietary interest as allowed by statute. Those definitions are in statute on when you have a conflict, and G is really just information.
I think that's all the questions I have.
Mayor, if I could. I know that it's covered in other parts of this code, but in item C, under upon the character and motives of other members, council, boards, commissions, committees, city staff, or the public.
What page?
2.
Very top of 2.
So if I had a question of motive as to why a city member of staff or another member of council did something. By this, I would not be able to ask that question. Or is this just covering abusive conduct?
So I think character and motives, the way I read that, council member, is if you engage in abusive conduct related to their motive, or abusive conduct related to their character, or if there was a verbal attack related to their motive. So I think the list of abusive conduct, personal charges, or verbal attacks applies to both character and motives of third parties.
How do I know if I inspire anybody? Said, how do I know if I inspire anybody?
When you get a check in the mail.
for less than $25.
For less than $25.
So what's the process after tonight? So let's just say, for example, we're happy with this. Then do we bring it back for action at a regular council meeting?
Yeah, the next meeting, the 9th, we'll turn this around, and I don't think, given the input so far, I think we can easily turn this around, get you another draft, and then put it on action on Tuesday night and adopt it. Staff will do a better job of bringing this forward each year, having it reviewed, getting on. I think we'll set it up as a January thing, to make sure that we look at it and just at least have it on the agenda, remind everybody, and do that. I have dropped the ball on making sure you're aware, and we're following this by doing yearly updates, which it asks.
And that's right.
We'll do better there.
The only other question I have is, Paul and I talked about this yesterday, was under the new description under reporting ethics violations and enforcement, page 6, under BA, subsection A, reporting to city manager and or the city attorney. And my concern was that I don't have a problem going to either or, but I don't understand why it doesn't come before this body in an executive session to decide whether or not this warrants any further. Why it goes to a city manager, whether that be Paul or somebody else, or Bill Sims or somebody else. I don't understand that, as we don't work for the city manager, and for the city manager or the attorney to decide what is ethical or not ethical based off of if this is our code. And so I just had a question as to that.
And council member, how this generally works is you just need an individual to accept the complaints. So that would be the city manager or city attorney. And their role is just to go through and make sure the name of the complainant, the name of the alleged violator, they're just checking through and making sure all 7 of those requirements in the complaint are there. And then their role is, if everything in there is true, is it a violation? I mean, if you get a complaint and it's not a violation, even if everything they say is true, then there's really no reason to proceed. But if there is something that is a violation, then you would move on to the next one.
And Mr. Mayor, members of council, Councilman Leatham, in D, it says city manager and city attorney. I think Tina's right. In the A, it's accepting the document is who will physically accept it.
Okay.
But that's a check and balance. Both have to agree.
So basically, you do the fact checking.
The city manager and attorney need to do the fact checking.
And then they can dismiss whether or not
It moves forward.
Yeah.
At which point, then it would probably end up on our plate.
So I have another question. So Fernando again. In several of the positions that I hold, I have to file a form every year with the conflict of interest policy. Would this be also our conflict of interest policy, since it actually is addressed in it? Or should we have a separate conflict of interest policy? Because I don't think I've been asked to sign one on behalf of the city. But every other organization that I sit on their board, or even State Farm, I have to sign one every year.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Shipley, Tina, isn't that the open meeting law is your conflict of interest, that you understand if it impacts less than 10, or, you have financial gain?
So what I'm used to in other cities is it's actually a case by case basis. So if you have a conflict on an agenda item, then you would fill out a form for that agenda item. I'm not sure how you would know you have a conflict at the beginning of the year unless you know of an upcoming project that'll be before you.
Yeah, the one for the college board that I'm on, they specifically want to know if you would stand to benefit from a contract or some kind of negotiation. So of course I put no. But then if something does arise during the course of doing your board work, then at that point you disclose. And then when I do anything for WIFA, they make me fill out a form and tell them why I chose not to participate. So I have to do that. Now, some people are voting present because it could be a perceived conflict, but it's not literally a conflict. So then I'll just vote present. So I'm not sure how we would handle that.
Shelley has something to add.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and good point, and I just wanted to run this by the city attorney. Is that more or less what the financial disclosure establishes at the beginning of each year, is possibly a conflict of interest because you state all of your interests on that form?
Shelley, good, very good. That's why I'm so glad she's there. Yes, from a general standpoint, but simply asked a more discrete question on a case-by-case basis. What happens when a matter is on the agenda, comes before council? Let me tell you how I do that in the other 7 I work with. What I say is I have an open phone. I won't bill. Give me a call. And I'm not your attorney. I am the city's attorney. But where I think it's appropriate is for me to help you test whether or not you think you have a conflict. Because if you do, it could render the action voidable. And we, the city, the council, don't want the action to be voidable. So I encourage conversation. But at the end of the day, I don't advise you personally. You make your own decision. But there are penalties. I mean, there are severe, you could be removed from office. And so I think it's better just to have an full open discussion. If you have a concern, ask it. And I've done that a lot. And the counselors appreciate it. And we go back and forth. And then if they agree with me, they recuse themselves. If they don't agree with me, I say, well, then you need to get an attorney, because there could be, it's up to you, because there could be consequences and it could impact on the city, but it's your call. But if I could go back to Freddie asked a good question about fact checking, and this relates to what Charlene, I think, asked, and I think Jesse asked. We, the manager and the attorney, won't be determining whether or not these facts are true. We're just determining, are all the elements in the complaint, and if they are true, then we'll kick it, assuming they're true. We're not the ones challenging whether or not there was a false statement made. We don't do that. We're just checking to see if the 7 requirements are there. And Freddie, if that's what you meant by fact checking, that's correct. But we are not. The manager and the attorney will not be out investigating the counselors to see if what they told was true. The investigative officer would. And hopefully by having this filter process, we won't jump into all these the way we've been doing them in the past.
Good, Mike.
It says that the ethics officer is selected by the city manager and or attorney.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, I would assume so, because HR, this is council ethics. HR is to a point a different animal. So I think it would be someone that we trust and understands council manager form of government in that way. I believe that it still would most likely, if it was a significant event, someone of the stature of Tina to do that on the outside. But it leaves a lot of latitude. Tina, what were you telling me about the latitude this allows? But it doesn't say hearing officer and attorney like the old code did.
Right, so I think an independent ethics officer could depend on who that is, could depend on the complaint. I mean, you want somebody that can understand, ask the right questions, write a report, and really guide counsel through it. So if there's a situation, I mean, we tried to take out the provisions that were redundant with your HR. So I'm not sure a human resources officer would be a correct person. But if, there's a certain violation and somebody has some expertise in that, it's possible they wouldn't have to be an attorney. If it's something that, a city attorney would understand better than anybody else, you can look for somebody that represents other cities that doesn't have a conflict.
If it was, Mr. Mayor, members of council, if it was a procurement issue, it might do an outside financial person or something like that. I don't know.
I think to me it makes sense, and the reason it makes sense is that we have to work together, and so if you investigating it strains the relationship, or your opinion of me affects your view of the facts, well, if he says it, then I don't believe it. Right. I mean, so that's possible. I think it insulates us from having that. So you have someone who doesn't maybe know anybody involved and then does an independent investigation. I think it protects everybody. So I think it makes sense the way it's written. One thing I did like about it is it did say that, and this is one thing I don't like, is if we start getting too nitpicky about everything and then everything's either a violation or it's not a violation. I mean, it says that if we can resolve it informally, that is the preferred method. If we can just say, hey, just watch your tone up there during the council meetings, or hey, remember to direct everything through the chair or the mayor. You know what I mean? It nips a lot of problems, but to wait until somebody's mad and then file a complaint and then have to investigate, I just think is silly. So I'm glad that's in there, and I'm glad that that's the first place we go.
We need a motion to approve this?
Any other comments on the document draft?
And Mr. Mayor, members of council, I think the motion would be a motion to approve this with the direction and return at the next available meeting for final approval
With the
with the changes as
With the amendment, with one amendment.
The changes?
Bill.
Bill?
Yeah, I have. Bill has.
Ellie's got all of them.
So we wouldn't vote to recommend them. We just say bring it back with the changes, right?
Yeah, I think we.
Yeah.
It's agenda as an action item, so I think we vote to move it forward. That is more. I think it's more than direction.
For our review. Sounds like a motion to me. Is that a motion?
Second. I'll second that.
We have motion and second to move draft copy forward to the next meeting with the changes made and recommended.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, just real quick for the attorneys, and Tina, Bill, I think that once this is passed, it supersedes the older policy. Do we have to unapprove the older one, or does this supersede that? Because the name's gonna be different. That's we're changing up the name to council ethics policy rather than public official.
I think something is important at this. I think Shelley and I can do a short resolution that I think they should formally adopt this policy, replace the old one, and have this be recorded and have it available at the clerk's office. I think it should be a formal resolution at the next board meeting or council meeting.
Okay, that sounds good.
Any other discussion?
Mr. Mayor, so bringing this back annually, is that something outside of the resolution?
No, I think it's part of the policy is to return it once a year for review. Yeah.
I
think the
totally
very
agree
last-
with reviewing this annually, not just for this council, but future councils. I think it gives us opportunities to look at things and not get caught up in a 10-year-old document that may not make sense or be reasonable. So, thank you.
Any other discussion? Call for the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Entertain a motion for adjournment.
Motion made.
Second.
Motion a second for adjournment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Meeting adjourned. Thank you.